But the other day, yeah. Well, and it was a warmer day too. They're a little bit more active. I would say there was at least two of them typically on some of the days. And then you got here, you know, just standing there. It's like, okay, don't do anything, you know, to make the whole bunch of them. It's like, so here I am trying to do what I was to get out of there. Yeah, it's stinging, just not right away. Oh, this hurts. And so walked away, put down what I had, and walked away. Went in, took a Benadryl, and away we went. That could be good. Yeah, that's first thing. That's first thing I asked her. So anyway, I know he's going to be suited up now. Well, that's what I've been doing. Well, that's the way I am now. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be a mouse guy anymore. Oh, no, that would be, yeah.
Absolutely, that's excellent. I'll send you an email when we are free.
Did Sting in there too? Or no? That would be when it's 34 degrees, it's like, okay, I'll be a B1 with yeah, that's what we're going to do. It's going to be easy. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's, from now on, it's suicide.
I'm Michelle Bartling. That's what I hear. And it's real small town, not that one contractors. Well, so as I was sharing with David, that even though probably not be your best, we are going to facilitate this game for are you still doing have a private practice like houses?
Well, if you learn we're trying to get a fellowship. So I'm trying to balance 7 expectations.
That's hard. You have people like Mike Dye. Wow. Those yes.
We've got some new jobs over yeah, I just there's some needs out there. There's some new things out there.
It's really time. It was time.
Eventually, it'll take a while to learn.
Oh, absolutely.
So where are you from?
I came here from Atlanta. I grew up in St. Louis.
St. Louis.
Yeah. Kirkwood, absolutely. You know, Paul Reichert? He graduated from
Oh, we did?
Yeah, yes. And so when I applied and saw that I was in New City,
Yeah.
he said we were rivals. I said, we're just looking at hiring me. I don't remember so far long ago.
Did you grow up in St. Louis?
I
St. Louis for 5-6 years. And music art. Sitting out in the evening, and the zoo.
Right. And the Admiral on the river.
Yeah, but I remember going to
Oh, yeah. Carpenter.
yeah, that was the most.
I know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Grand Avenue, right?
Yeah.
My brother likes to tell the stories of he had the sodas, he carried sodas around talking about how they pick up the top of you just don't want to know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You just don't want to know. Well, it looks like we got a house, we can get started. Good evening. We're going to use this tonight because we don't assume that anybody will hear everything, and I'm sure if you came out on a beautiful night like tonight, you wanted to do that. My name is Michelle Bartlett, and I'm really glad that you're here. Some of you I know, and some of you are friends, and those of you who don't know me, I'm Director of Summer Programs here at the University, and we're really excited to have this particular series going on. This summer we have, in addition to the 300 courses we're offering for students, we have 47 different events going on campus. 11 of them, this is the 11th one, so if you've missed a few, you still have 36 to go, okay? And there's only one of them that we're actually charging for that's left, and that's Political Junkie with, do we have any NPR fans here? Okay. Neil Conan is going to be here teaching a course on campus this summer, and he and Ken Rudin are going to be doing a show called The Political Junkie. And I think as we've been getting all this political stuff on the air and in the newspaper and radio, it would be fun to come and just laugh about it. So the 11th of July, those of you who would like to come, we do have tickets. We have free events 4 nights a week. Last night was Magical Mondays. It's a hands-on science for kids and their families. Tonight is Healthy Living. Tomorrow night is Discover Alaska. And on Thursday night we have Music in the Garden, which is the Georgeson Botanical Garden. All of these events are free, and the reason we do this is because we want the Fairbanks community to come and take advantage of it. This series started last year when a Fairbanks community member sent the chancellor a note and said, we should have a forum so that people could, he proposed a course to learn more about being an advocate for yourself. And I thought,
a course, that means charging, that means, and then it would only be one focus, and you'd have to commit, and you might have to take a test, and no, we didn't want to do that. So I called Mike Powers and we sat down, who's the CEO of the hospital, and if you don't know him, you should, because he's awesome. And he and his team sat down, and we planned out a series. And we had never, this was just an idea, and it came together about February. They came up with the programming, we came up with the venue and the marketing, and Cooperative Extension Service is the one who actually put up the money so that the marketing could all be done and people would know about it. So it's a public-private partnership, and you just need to know all the players that are involved. Tonight's topic is about hospice. Now, all of us in this room probably have a real personal story related to that, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And actually mine came in 1983 when my friend Irene Wickwire, anybody remember Irene Wickwire, who was an artist in Fairbanks, and she had metastatic melanoma, and she had 2 kids and she was newly divorced, 2 teenage kids and newly divorced. And she found herself in the hospital at Fairbanks Memorial on Thanksgiving Day. She had a group of very close friends, female friends. Irene died in February, and between the time she checked in, the day of Thanksgiving, she was not alone. She was not alone. Her friends, we were around the clock, we did shifts, and it wasn't a burden, it was a gift that we gave to her. However, you can't sustain that. That is not something that can be sustained. So people got together, the group that worked with her, which was Sheila Goddard and Sally Fairfield. These names may register with people. Mike Carroll, Ann Swift, Bonnie Johnson, they formed a committee, and out of that, hospice group. And so we're very, very grateful. What it looked like back in 1984, as opposed to what it looks today, is a whole different ballgame, and it's evolved into something we continue to be proud of. We were proud of it when it started, and we're even more proud of it today. And we're very fortunate this evening that 3 members of the team at Fairbanks Memorial have come to share what is going on with hospice in our community. And Kim Huffington, who's a registered nurse, who came here from Colorado just a year ago. Her husband's grateful that she actually chose to come and join him. Is going to start off, and she's going to introduce the rest of you members of your team as we go. Thank you very much. Oh, let me just explain the way this is going to go. They're going to make their presentation, and it's going to last for about an hour. Those people who would like to stay around for a Q&A afterwards, we're going to take like a 60-second break, and you can leave. The other thing I wanted to tell you about is every Friday, in the newspaper, we put a list of the things that are to come, the events that are coming up, and it's in the newspaper. However, if you like your own personal copy, if you give us your email address, we will send it out to you so that you will know what's happening on campus. And we've got at the table outside. All right, Kim, it's all yours. Thank you.
Good evening. Thanks for coming out tonight to hear about hospice. I hope you find it informative and that we answer your questions. As Michelle said, I am an RN. I've been an RN for over 30 years, which whenever I say that makes me feel old, and I can't possibly be old. But then I think about how old my kids are, and now I'm a grandma, so maybe I am kind of getting closer to making some end-of-life decisions. So in hospice, that's what we talk about a lot, is what you want, how you want to be cared for, what your goals are, what you're thinking, because we want to honor that. And I think with tonight's presentation with Dr. Bartling and David, you'll get a real sense of what we do. We as a team feel very blessed to have the rich history of the Hospice of the Tanana Valley volunteers. They laid such a great foundation for hospice care in this area, and we are just honored to carry that forth. But if you spend any time at all looking at the news monitor, you'll see that everybody's needing a little help. This article is in this morning's paper, and the title is Family Caregivers Need Help and Kindness, similar to what Michelle was talking about back in the 80s. And over the weekend, the big headline was an aging population and how that looks with assisted livings and skilled nursing facilities in Fairbanks. So we're hoping that we are working right now with the assisted livings and skilled nursing facility to provide end-of-life care. But I think from the news and from what all we're hearing, that we really need to just kind of work together and build those collaborative relationships. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bartling. He will kind of give his own little bio, because I don't have it. So I'll let him talk about himself, and he'll kick off the presentation.
So my name is Victor Bartling. I practice family medicine at TVC. I've been here for about 15 years. Prior to that, prior to Fairbanks, I worked in a small town in Salmon, Idaho as a family doc. Prior to that, I spent a year overseas doing some volunteer work with my wife and 4 daughters in Papua New Guinea. And then prior to that, I spent 5 years in Nome after residency, working for Norton Health Corporation, taking care of the native population on the Seward Peninsula. And then prior to that, with residency and so forth. So Fairbanks has been a really beautiful place to be, and very fortunate to have a university here. I think it's a drawing power to keep people here, and so we're really glad to be here. This is our home. So this evening, what I'd like to talk about briefly is we'll talk about hospice, and I'm going to let Kim kind of get into the nuts and bolts. We'll talk about bereavement and what that means, and I'll have David Rumph, our chaplain, talk about that. And I wanted to talk a little about what palliative medicine is all about, what death and dying has been in the past, what it's like today, and how can we transition through this. Let's see. So as Michelle mentioned, our hospice has been around for, we're getting on to 3 years. It's really moving quickly, isn't it? This is a facility that was built by the Hospice of Tampa Valley back in, we started in '84. And again, we really want to respect the hard work and the volunteer efforts and time that was spent with that. And so we joined hands roughly about 3 years ago to bring a medical hospice program here. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail here. So, how has dying changed? Certainly, if we go back 100 years, we didn't have a lot of medicine. People died primarily of infectious disease. And so the life expectancy was about 47 years. And when you did get to that point where you were dying, physicians didn't have a lot of tools, medicines, and so forth. And so the average age of death was around 47 years. People died from days to weeks. And today, when you go 100 plus years, number one cause of death is heart disease, stroke, and cancer. And so our expectancy is another 30 years, but now the dying process is very prolonged. We've gone from days to weeks to now years, which really makes a difference in how we treat the end of life. So most of us probably, when we think about dying, perhaps we'd like to just wake up someday and die. But the reality is, less than 10% of us will do that. Most of us will die of diseases that will continue for quite some time. So as you can see up here, we have cancer, organ failure, and dementia. So the dying process is a much prolonged process, and some people actually consider it almost a transition of life. So when you look at how people die, just real briefly, when people get, for instance, on this first number one here, for people to get cancers, they're cruising along, living life with cancer, and then suddenly the disease burden of that disease starts to take toll, and the disease process goes rather quickly, and then death occurs. And if we're going to predict any of these diseases, probably cancers are probably the easiest of the other disease processes. If you go to the next slide over, chronic illnesses, we have people have congestive heart failure, people with lung disease, people with liver disease. You get the disease, you may suddenly have an exacerbation of that disease process where you get the dip down, and then when you recover, your recovery is not quite the same, and there's a continued slow decline in functional status. Another exacerbation of the disease occurs, and then again, a slow process. But this is very difficult to predict as to when someone with bad lung disease or heart disease actually is getting close to death, versus people who have diseases of dementia, where it's a very, very slower process, stepwise, may last for many, many years. We do a number of folks in the Denali Center and our assisted living homes, and it's very difficult to predict when those folks are going to finally succumb to the disease process. And then finally, we can look at people that have a neurological disease like a stroke, where suddenly you're functioning fine and all of a sudden you can't move your arm and a leg, you've had a massive stroke. That may really decrease function, and again, it's a stepwise approach. Can be very hard to predict. So in brief, 100 years ago, the dying process was quick. The focus was really at the bedside. It was family members who were there with a focus on caring. Not a lot of medications. It was quick. Most people died at home. Today, it's almost an additional developmental stage. So we have childhood, adulthood, chronic disease, and this slow decline of living with the disease process. We don't have a lot of cures for many of these disease processes. And the other question that occurs that we need to really consider is that a lot of people die in institutions. So how do we want to die? Well, most of us want to die at home, but where do we die? 50% in the hospital, 25% in skilled nursing facilities, and about a quarter of us will have the opportunity to die at home. So this is an important study. It was a while ago, but I think a lot of these statistics probably hold true today. So this is a study that looked at 2,000 to 3,000 terminally ill people in the hospital. And they came up with some conclusions. About 50% of people had their end-of-life goals, their advanced directives addressed during that time. At least 10%, or at least 40% spent 10 days in the ICU, intensive care. 50% of family members thought that their loved ones had severe pain. About 50% of patients didn't really know what their CPR status was. And this is important. 30% of family members really thought that there wasn't any respect for their loved one. And 50% of families didn't get enough information about the disease process, about dying. So people died alone, in pain, and the conclusion was that there was needless suffering in hospitals because of poor communication about the disease process, what the goals were. And so the key thing is communication. So there's this concept called palliative medicine, which we'll talk about just briefly. And so what is a good death? And so palliative medicine and what we as patients feel is a good death, they mirror each other. But palliative medicine, the idea is to address physical pain, the psychological issues that occur, allow patients to have some identity, to have respect, to enhance the relationships of the patient and the family, and to achieve the goals that the patient wants to get, which is not unkeen to what patients want. They don't want to have a lot of pain. They don't want to have a prolonged dying process. They want a sense of control. They don't want to be a burden to family members. And they want to have a strengthened relationship with their loved ones. So we can't talk about hospice without talking about Dr. Sanders. She lived in England, started out as a nurse, then got trained as a social worker, and subsequently then became a physician. She was a very religious lady, and when people were dying and people said there's nothing else that can be done, her comments were, there's so much to be done. And so she pioneered the whole concept of addressing total pain, and we'll talk about that briefly. And she addressed the issues about how can we relieve pain with drugs, opiates at that time. Interestingly, she took care of someone who was a refugee from Warsaw, Polish Jew, who donated roughly about 500 pounds, the equivalent of 13,000 pounds today, and said, what I'd like you to do is use this money as a window in your room. So she took some of this money and she started this St. Christopher's Hospital to start this program. And that is where she did her research, that's where she took care of people, that's where she brought the concept of total pain, that's where she brought the concept of hospice, and she herself finally dies in the same facility that she helps to found at the age of 87 of cancer. So what is total pain? So pain and suffering is not just physical, as probably most physicians think about, but pain is total. And so when people say, I'm suffering and having pain, it's important to think of the psychological issues, the anxiety, the worry, the depression, maybe the post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms that occur as the disease process occurs. It's important to look at the social issues, the lost relationships, the relationships that need to come back together, the hurt that's occurred, the emotional thoughts of financial issues that occur. And then, of course, the spiritual issues, which David addresses with, who am I, where am I, why am I going, what is the next phase of this life? And so when someone says, I have pain, it doesn't mean it's saying I need more morphine. It may be that there is some spiritual pain that's causing this. So it's very important to look at the whole person. So palliative care, the concept of palliative care in the Latin word means to cloak, to put a garment around. So the focus with palliative medicine isn't just the patient, but it's the family. And it's cloaking that treating unit to really improve the quality of communication, looking at goals, and relieving suffering. So a couple things. A lot of people with palliative care, it's really important to realize that one of the tenets is that the dying process is normal, which is sometimes hard to understand. And the idea is that we don't want to hasten, nor do we want to postpone death, which I think can be very difficult in medicine today. So again, the treating unit really is the family. And with palliative medicine, the idea is that it's a multidisciplinary approach. We have nursing, we have physicians, we have chaplains, we have social services, we have pharmacy, where the patient and the family are the focus, and the dialogue starts there. And then all the other treating issues around the spoke of the wheel is to try and treat people in parallel with what those goals are. So palliative medicine can occur as soon as the disease process occurs. So looking above there at the prognosis of a serious illness, let's say end-stage congestive heart failure, you can go ahead with all the medications, put in defibrillators, but at the same time, palliative medicine can start looking at a symptom control, talk about goals of care, and as that congestive heart failure patient starts to decline from the disease process, the palliative medicine issues start ramping up to the point where eventually there is that the patient themselves may say enough is enough, and so we do no more curative care, and now it's mostly palliative care. When the prognosis of that disease process has hit a reasonable time of someone succumbing to that disease within 6 months, that's when the hospice benefit can occur, and then as someone dies, then for 13 months after that death, hospice services provides bereavement care. But it's important to think that in medicine, typically over the last few years, in the hospital, it's been treat, continue to treat. There's a loss of function, see what we can do, more procedures, more treatment. And somewhere in that whole process, sometimes it's difficult to reel back and say, are we doing really what the patient wants or the family wants? Is it time to get the discussion of should we maybe step back on the accelerator? And that's where palliative medicine is available to really try and get discussion and goal setting available. So this is the bottom line. And that is why we lift on 3. So it's important that everybody in the hospital really understand that we're lifting the patient together, right? And we don't want to drop the ball or the head. So for the last 2.5, 3 years, informally at FMH, we've been having palliative care runs every Thursday. It's a team of pharmacists, nurses, nurse practitioners, social workers, physicians, chaplains, nurse practitioners from the community, hospice nurses, people from the cancer center, talking about patients. And so our goal in the very near future is to have an inpatient palliative care service. When you look around the country over the last 10 plus years, there's roughly about 15,000 palliative care programs in-house. Large hospitals of over 300 beds, generally about 85% of people or those facilities would have a hospice or a palliative care program. So with the Affordable Care Act and with Obamacare, a lot of people look at palliative medicine as pulling the plugs. And I think it's really important that that is indeed not the issue here. The issue is really to put the patient and the family as the focus when treatment options arise and the disease process starts to decline. So what has palliative care done in the hospital? It's improved suffering, people that have shortness of breath, chest pain, anxiety. It's reduced hospital admissions. It's improved satisfaction. If you remember from the previous study where family members thought that their loved ones suffered, that they died alone. It's improved the quality of care. There's education that goes with nurses and physicians. And in some cases, pulling back actually has prolonged people's lives. So I'm going to turn this briefly over to Kim, and she can start talking about hospice.
So the Medicare hospice benefit came about in the 1980s. And it really hasn't been touched upon or really even changed until recently with the changes in the Affordable Health Care Act. And so now we are undergoing some tweaking of our benefit. But basically, what I think Medicare got it right in the 80s, and so they should have left it alone. But that's a topic for another evening. So what we do, what Medicare says we have to do, is have a team approach. And that team consists of the folks that Dr. Bartling talked about, the physician, our medical director, our chaplain, a social worker, nurses, home health aides, and of course our volunteers. Medicare also stated that any Medicare certified hospice had to have at least 5% of their hours be volunteer hours. And I can tell you that in Colorado, our hospice had, we got about 12 to 15%, and we thought we were great. I come to Fairbanks and we're running around 50%. So I think we're tremendous up here with our volunteer support. And our volunteers do things like we honor veterans program, so they help with that program. They help with respite care in the home, similar to what Michelle was describing, maybe not to the 24 hours a day, but to give the family some breaks so they can go to Fred Meyer's and do what they need to do, or maybe just get out of the house and go for a drive. Our volunteers do amazing things like that, and they respond at all hours. I just can't believe it. Karen Callahan, our volunteer coordinator, will say, well, I sent out a rally calling about 5 people. How many do you want? I'm like, well, 1 is all we wanted, but we'll take all 5. So how does the Medicare hospice benefit work? Basically, if you have Medicare Type A, your Medicare benefit is paid for. You won't ever get a bill from us. Medicare gives us a flat rate of around $170 a day. Out of that, we are the only Medicare benefit that covers medications to the extent that are related to your terminal diagnosis, be it heart disease, lung disease, cancer. We also pay for medications related to pain, suffering, symptom management, diarrhea, constipation, nausea, vomiting, all those kinds of things. If you need a hospital bed, oxygen, and it's related to your terminal diagnosis, we'll pay to get that brought out. So we pretty much cover everything. We also have nurses available on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And our goal really is to give the patients and the family the information that they need to take care of the patient. Because if we ask any of you, you will tell me you want to die at home, that you want to just go to sleep and not wake up. And as Dr. Bartling said, that doesn't happen very often, but our goal is to help you mirror what you want. In 13 years of doing hospice care, I've only taken care of 2 patients that said I don't want to die at home. And they were parents living in the home of their children. And they said, I don't want my grandchildren to see me die. So what we did was we arranged to transfer them to a facility when we knew they were getting close. And that worked very well, and we honored their wishes. I like to say, you hear a lot of do not resuscitate. I like to say hospice allows a natural death, because that's really what we do. We just allow you to make those decisions, and we give you the information you need to make those informed decisions. So, next slide, our team. Oh, good. Okay, so as the slide says, our goal is palliative, not curative. We want to relieve suffering. We want to manage your symptoms. I had a little lady in Colorado named Hazel, and she's my poster child. Hazel had pancreatic cancer. I went out and did her admission, and Hazel stopped chemo. She said, I'm done. She told the oncologist, I can't do this anymore. I'm so sick. I am miserable. And he said, if you stop chemo, you will die in 2 weeks. And she said, good. I'd rather be dead than live one more day like this. And he said, fine, I'm calling hospice. So I went out and admitted her, and Hazel, her son had moved in to help take care of her. And Hazel had horrific nausea, vomiting, and pain. We got those symptoms managed and went back to see her a few days later, and Hazel said, Kim, I'm feeling pretty good. I said, well, good, Hazel, I'm glad to hear that. She said, I'd like to go get my hair done. I haven't had my hair done in 3 weeks. I said, well, Hazel, go, get your hair done. Well, Kim, I'm on hospice. I said, that doesn't preclude you from getting your hair done, just go. So she said, oh, I can do that? I said, yes. Went back the next week, and Hazel said, got my hair done, got my nails done, I'm feeling great. And then she said, I used to go out once a week and have lunch with my friends. Can I do that? I said, yes, Hazel, you can go to lunch. She said, well, Kim, I'm on hospice. I can't go to the beauty shop and go out to lunch with my friends. I said, yes, you can, Hazel. So Hazel went out to lunch. The next week, Hazel said, I used to play cards once a week. Can I play cards? I said, Hazel, would you get out of this house and live your life? She said, well, I'm feeling really good. If I'd known hospice was this much fun, I'd have done it way before that chemotherapy. So Hazel lived 7 months. And until the last month of her life, she lived her life. She did the cards, she did the lunch, she did the beauty shop, she went on short little trips with her family. She just had a ball. And when I'd go see her, that's what she'd say. I've known hospice was this much fun, I would have not messed with all that other business. So that's what I like to say, is that's our goals of care. We want you to live your life how you want to live it, not how the medical community thinks you should live it. We think as death is a natural part of life. When I was growing up, my grandparents and my parents taught me you don't talk about sex, you don't talk about religion, and you don't talk about politics. Now we talk about all those things. We see it on TV, we see it everywhere, but we still don't talk about dying. And that's a topic that we need to be talking about more, I think. It's a natural part. We're not any of us going to get out alive, we just don't know when. So, but as Dr. Bartling said, we use a team approach, and we do not do anything to hasten death nor prolong life. And I've had patients say to me, when do you bring me the black pill? Well, we don't have, it's always black. It's black in Colorado and it's black in Alaska. And I say, we don't have that black pill. We just will support you and allow you to have nature take its course. We have a picture. So our hospice team is here, and I'm going to skip this slide and go right to the next one because this is our amazing team. So this is our nurses, our volunteer coordinator, Dr. Bartling, David, our office staff, and I think you'll learn that if you see these people out and about in the community, if you ask any one of them what hospice is, they can all tell you what they think it is. So it's a great group. So for admission to hospice, Medicare said you have to have 2 doctors sign off. That's your personal doctor and Dr. Bartling. And they have to say that if your disease process is to follow its natural course, death is expected within 6 months or less. As in Hazel's case, it went over 6 months, and that's okay. The doctors kept saying, you know what, she's got her pancreatic cancer didn't go away. I've had patients say that, oh, my pain's gone, so you must have cured my cancer. well, no, we just got your pain better managed. So, we do know that we can't always predict. I will say we don't have a crystal ball. We can't predict the future. I got out, seen a patient, got them admitted on a Friday and said, oh, we've got time, don't hurry, you know, they'll be around a while, and they die over the weekend. My own grandma did that with her cancer. We admitted her to hospice, and she told me that night I was going up and taking care of her. This was before I was doing hospice. I didn't know what hospice nursing was about, but I'd go up every night and tuck her to bed and, you know, get her comfortable so she could sleep. And the night she died, I called and said, Grandma, on my way, she lived in a senior citizen building, so she had to let us in. And she said, Kim, you don't need to come tonight. I said, Grandma, you know, it's no problem. The boys are in bed. I'm fine. You know, I'll be up. Mark's home, blah, blah, blah. And she said, no, really. She said, that hospice nurse is here. I don't have any pain. I don't need you to come. You need to stay home with your boys. And I said, Grandma, my boys are sleeping. I'm fine. And we kind of argued. And she said, would you listen to me? And then she said, well, you never have. Would you tonight listen to me? I'm fine. I'll see you tomorrow. She died that night in her sleep. So, and that's what we see a lot. We get pain managed and we're able to let go. So, we do think that doctors, and I'll include Dr. Bartling in this, are overly optimistic usually. Although Dr. Bartling is much more on task with this prediction than I am. So, it's difficult. As I said, you know, you just can't predict how much time, because I think the emotional, spiritual, and physical planes all have to come together for a patient to be able to let go and then pass on. So most of our patients are routine home care, and that's what I described. We come out to the house, we visit you, our nurses visit as often or as little as you need. Medicare says we have to see you once every 15 days. Our chaplain has to go out once a month, our social worker twice a month, and our nurse aides come whenever you think you need help with personal care, and our volunteers are very much that way as well. We do continuous home care very little. That's in-home care when we can't get something managed. I like to call it crisis care, because if you say continuous home care, that means to some people, oh, they are going to move in, they are going to take care of me, but it's truly set up by Medicare to just deal with those crisis situations. General inpatient care is where we transfer you to FMH because we can't get that symptom managed at home. So we do have to, you know, maybe take something, a more aggressive approach, and we can't do it safely in the home. And then sometimes the primary caregiver has surgery or has to travel outside, and then we need to place the patient because there's no one else to take care of them. So Medicare says, you know what, you can do that for 5 days every benefit period. And so we use 2 South at FMH for that. So this is just a slide that kind of compares the differences between home health and hospice. Again, home health has lots more regulations than hospice. That's the biggie here. So our patients, as you know from Hazel, they don't have to be homebound. We can increase and decrease our visits as needed, waxes and wanes. So we cover medications, oxygen, all those kinds of things that the home health benefit doesn't cover. So 36% of our hospice patients have cancer, and then heart disease, dementia, debility, and lung disease are the other diagnoses. Nobody just dies from old age anymore. You have to have a disease. So some things that discourage hospice admission. You know, I wish that I could say that more people are signing up for hospice, and they really are, but I always think how much more we can do. There's just such a great need. So our average length of stay is about 19 days. We do a lot of work in those 19 days. I've gathered loved ones around the bed as someone's taking their last breath. It's really hard to do good work when you're at that last moment. So a lot of our patients care for 7 days or less. Doctors sometimes say discourage hospice because they say we take away hope. And we never do that. We never know. And that, as I said, we don't predict. We don't try to predict. We think hospice is needed because we want to get your pain and symptoms managed, and the doctors feel that they can't approach that hard subject. If you've ever had to try that conversation, about how you want your death to look with your loved ones or your physician, it is hard. My husband and I just did it with my parents a few weeks ago, and I cried through the whole thing. And I thought, man, I've been doing this for 13 years. Right? And said, no, don't sign that, Mom. I don't know. So, there is still that tendency to think that we're giving up or just throwing in the towel, but or that we're just going to bring out the morphine or the black pill, and that's can be further from the truth. So some feel that once we start the morphine, that hastens death. But as I said, sometimes we just get that pain managed, and then someone is able to just let go because that pain was the only thing really they were holding on to. So here's the death panel. I love this because I finally thought maybe they were going to get something right when they were going to let doctors they were going to pay them to talk about death and dying with their patients. And this is not how it should look, but it was, all they're going to do is bump off grandma. Well, hospices don't bump off grandma. We don't encourage pulling the plug. So if that's your only takeaway tonight, that'll be a good one. So I'm going to turn it back over.
So I came up with this quote that I thought was very interesting. So life is pleasant, death is peaceful. It's a transition that's troublesome. And this is from Isaac Asimov. So I researched a little about Isaac Asimov after hearing this quote, and it turns out that he had coronary disease, had a heart attack in 1977, subsequently had worsening of his heart disease, and then had a bypass in 1983 and had some blood transfusions, had some complications from the bypass. And then he died in 1992 from from kidney failure. Well, as it turns out, actually, he died from complications from HIV. He got a blood transfusion, and his wife was very astute. HIV was just starting to come about, and his wife contacted the cardiologist and his internal medicine doc and said, should we be checking for HIV? No, he doesn't have HIV. It wasn't until later that he got sick that his valves needed to be replaced because he had an infection to his valves. And indeed, they checked him for HIV, and he had HIV. That was the same time in 1992 when Arthur Ashe, the tennis player, came out with HIV. And so, because of who Isaac Asimov was, his physician said, let's not talk about the HIV issue. He died of kidney disease. Well, it wasn't until 10 plus years after his death that his wife then revealed in a text called It's Been a Good Life that indeed her husband died from HIV. So life is pleasant, death is peaceful, but sometimes that transition can be troubling. So how do we want to die? Well, most of us want to have autonomy, we want to have dignity, and we really want our wishes respected. And so when you start asking people about this, most people say, hey, I don't want to be a burden. But most most sick folks have really not talked to the family members about this, and I have communicated the wishes. Again, most people want to stay at home. Most people don't want to be in a long-term care facility or in a hospital. Most patients want to talk to their physicians about end of life, but only about 7% of people really talk to physicians, and physicians talk to their patients about end of life issues. So at the bottom line, I think it's really, really important that we start the line of communication to occur. So again, it's all about communicating. It's about family members communicating with each other. And then it's about physicians and the community, the medical community, talking amongst themselves. And then also including the family and the patient in that discussion. So to begin that discussion, I think health providers need to do a better job when there's a crossroads of the disease trajectory. Do we continue with chemotherapy? Do we continue with doing more medications? Do we continue doing more procedures? What are the risks, the burdens of doing this? What are the goals that you have? And will this meet your goals of where we're going to go? Or if we're going to go ahead and put a pacemaker in, or if we're going to go ahead and do chemotherapy, what is the goal of this? And should we consider having a stop date? What are we after? Where are we? Does this just continue to go on and on? And family members need to start the conversation too. And so it's important that when someone gets a prognosis, indeed we hope for the best, we prepare for the worst, and we really attend to the present. Where are you today? What are your goals? What's important to you? How does this affect your decisions, this disease, what you want to do with the days that you have, the weeks, the months, the years ahead? So it's really important to keep this communication going. So I'm sure most of you know about advanced directives. And basically this is a form that allows people to, one, assign a loved one to be their spokesperson in the event that you, being the patient, can't communicate. And it's also, though, a time for you to communicate in writing what your wishes would be when that dying process comes, and how aggressive you may or may not, you may want to be. And it's very important to say that. Now, having done an advanced directives, a form, it's important that you just don't file it away, but the process of thinking about where you're at, where your disease process is at, and what you want to do to continue to live your life is very important, and that it isn't something that's shelved away, that the conversation needs to continue. So there's a couple of ways that you can do this. There's on the web, there's a thing called a conversation project, which is a really nice tool for family members to kind of start the conversation with their mother, their father, their loved one. And there's also another form that is called the 5 Wishes, much like the Alaska Advanced Directive, but much more easily to read, and also serves the same purpose. So those are two resources to look into. So just in closing, I wanted to share my story. I grew up in South Korea. My parents, born and raised in South Korea. My parents were missionaries. Mom and Dad traveled all over the world, took us all over the place. They retired in Seattle. My father was diagnosed with a bone cancer, Walden's Rumph, and was doing quite well. He was in that disease trajectory where he was just cruising along. Loved his oncologist in Seattle. I talked to him a lot, but I could tell that he was getting more frail. And then his oncologist said, well, your disease process is getting to the point, and I don't know exactly how he approached it, but he said, maybe it's time to start a little chemotherapy. Well, Mom and Dad had plans to go to Scotland and do this, and they bought everything, and sure enough, started chemotherapy. Not a big deal until a few days later, and my dad fell, got pneumonia, and it was within weeks that he passed away. Now, I talked to my dad a lot. I knew that he was failing and getting more frail, but Mom and Dad didn't really think so. In fact, they were ready to go, and this little chemotherapy to kind of, now your disease is getting a little worse, we'll start something, actually was a surprise. We happened to be down in Kenai. The girls were playing soccer, a match, a tournament. We were actually headed out to go canoeing in the Swanson canoe area. And so we said, well, what would Dad and I want us to do? We said, keep canoeing. So we went off and canoed and thought about him along the 4 or 5 days that we canoed. We came back from that trip, and lo and behold, family members said, nope, we're doing the funeral right away. And within a week, Mom's walking down the aisle for the funeral. And they had a bit large house, no preparations about who's going to take care of this big house. So within months, Mom sells the house, moves into a retirement condo, much like Raven Landing here, which is where she's been for the last 3 years. A few years ago, now she was diagnosed with bone cancer. So my discussions with her are totally different than with my father. She's bitter, she's mad, she feels that the medical system took away her husband of 50 plus years, that there wasn't real clear dialogue of what was really happening. So when I talked to Mom, in fact I just talked to Mom coming up here, who saw her oncologist a few days ago, she's starting a new chemotherapy regimen. and she's getting weaker. She continues to live life, has been up here, goes to graduations, goes to weddings, just was at another wedding 2 weeks up here. But I talked to Mom different and trying to encourage her to continue to look at what her goals are, where she's heading, and she has every right to consider to stop. And so I think her death will be different than my father's. So I think in closing, I think it's important to go back to Cicely Saunders, who says, the dying patients need the community, and the community needs the dying patient. As people die, I think some people get renewed purpose. There's closure, sometimes not always. There's a new awakening of relationships. And I think we as care providers, we as families also reflect on who we are, where we're heading, and what joy it is to be here, and how short life indeed is. So I think we need as a community to get discussions going, help each other out. We're all together as one team here. So, good. So what I'd like to do is have David Rumph, who's our chaplain, talk about what he does for hospice and bereavement services. So, David, you're on.
Thank you. Thanks, too, for sharing your story. I moved to Fairbanks in 2001. And in 2002, met Karen Callahan and was trained to be a hospice volunteer. It is a blessing, actually, at this point, to be a part of the team, the medical hospice team. It's much different. The volunteer hospice of the Tanana Valley served this community in ways that no one else could for many years. But the opportunities were limited. I can remember as a volunteer loading medical equipment in my vehicle, driving hospice patients to the store to pick up medications, but we were limited in what we could offer. Today, the medical hospice is 24/7 care, palliative, wraparound. I think of the Gwich'in word. Natives talk about wrapping. And so, as has been made clear, part of what we offer as a team is spiritual care, and this is my role. It is different from pastoral ministry. My role with the hospice team is more clinical. I am assessing and treating spiritual anxiety and distress at end of life. I leave out the word religious. We provide spiritual care. And I've written, let me quote, that spirituality is that aspect of being human that refers to the way that we seek and express meaning and purpose, and as the way that we experience our connections to the moment, to ourselves, to others, to nature, and to the sacred. Now, I can say I am seminary trained and ordained Christian minister, and religion can provide a beautiful framework for people to hang their spirituality on, but religion is not required. It's not necessary. We all, as human beings, are spiritual creatures. And it is helpful for the team, as well as myself, to understand and look at spirituality as that way that we choose to connect to other people, to ourselves, to the moment, and choices that we make over our lifetime that provide meaning and purpose. Yeah, so that's my work with the team. That's one hat. I also serve as the bereavement coordinator. And I want to point out that we are a part of the Fairbanks Memorial Hospital Foundation. We are owned by the community. So our bereavement services are available to the community. We offer them free. Grief counseling, grief classes, remembrance services twice per year. I provide funeral services, graveside services. We offer as well a suicide survivor support group for those who have lost a loved one to suicide. We have a special men's only group. We meet for breakfast once a month, and it's amazing. I promised when we began that there would be no heavy lifting. We're not going to get touchy-feely. We're going to have breakfast and talk about world events, but these men are quick to share their lives over the last month. What has been helpful, what hurts, what has happened. There's much good bereavement work being done through hospice. As Dr. Bartling pointed out in one slide, our service has continued for 13 months. This is part of the Medicaid requirement. I follow with phone calls and written materials the families of our patients for 13 months with the intent to make sure that they travel safely through their grief process through that first anniversary of death. So there, basically, I want to highlight that not only as a member of the team, but I think I can speak for the entire team, that we consider our service to the community a privilege. Families and patients invite us in to what we consider a sacred time, their end of life, and a sacred space, their home. So we never forget that we are guests, and our primary focus is to provide dignity and comfort. Thank you.
At this time, we know that some of your schedules you need to take off, and so we'll honor that. We'll take a couple minutes to let those that need to leave, and we're happy to stick around and answer questions. You can direct them at Dr. Bartling, David, or myself. And but if you need to go, you need to go. It's probably a beautiful evening out there still. Thank you all.
So, are there questions? Yeah, I think they're not going. They're not going.
I see the emphasis on older people. That's right, but do you have any services for some 10-year-old that's in terminal condition?
You know, so that's something we're working on. The youngest patient we've had here is 18. In Colorado, I was privileged to care for a newborn, a 2-year-old, a 7-year-old, and teenagers. And so those, I can tell you, are totally different. So since we are a new hospice team, we're moving towards the pediatric population. We're not there yet. That's not to say that if we got a phone call from the mom asking us for help, I wouldn't be calling Dr. Bartling saying, can you figure something out there? But yes, we're not there yet, but we're moving that direction.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do you have any support groups at the hospital or anything for people who are in the process of a chronic disease dying, you haven't quite reached that 6 months for hospice yet, but are within those couple of years.
Yeah, so that's what the palliative medicine service is that we hope to get going. We've got a task project going on right now with a tentative start date of about December. We'll see how that goes. So so our hope is to have a nurse, social worker, chaplain, and physician to sit down and do consults for patients and families to help look at goals of where they're at in their disease process, which then means communicating with specialists to figure out what best can we do to serve where that person's at. And then also consultations for pain issues, constipation, shortness of breath, that type of thing. So we hope to have that soon at the hospital.
If a person of the community then is sent to Seattle and they die in Seattle rather than the hospital here, would they still come under the bereavement care?
Yes, that's one of the beauties of hospice and Medicare benefit, and hospices work together across the United States. David has come to me with referrals for hospices in other states, and we just call them up and say, you know, this person lives in your area, but their mom died up here, can you follow them? The other beauty, I think, I felt for a while this last winter that I was more of a travel agent than a hospice manager because we had patients traveling to Hawaii and the lower 48, and that's the other beauty is that hospices will cover other patients, so they don't have to go without care no matter where they are.
To answer Bill's question, I was one of in the very first class that we had up in the we started at
88.
Is that what we, 88 is when we started?
Yeah.
The first class? Anyway, in January is when I took the class. But I did have one care receiver that was a 20-year-old, not a young child, but a 20-year-old, and was here in town working, and his mother flew up from the lower 48 to be with him periodically. So I was doing a lot of transporting her, getting her winter gear and things so she could stay here to be with him too.
It's tough work when they're 20 or 18 and trying to have those difficult conversations. It's even harder.
And I've had patients, well, ever since that first one, until Larry became a patient when he fell 3 years ago and I wasn't supposed to leave him. I was supposed to go by 24/7 care. And so he went, I couldn't leave him at all. So he went with me to garden club meetings at DAR. I went with him to hospice, and then if I went someplace where I couldn't take him, then I had to get a Larry Center. So that's when I had to stop taking care of patients myself. He was silent.
Yes, I know before 3 years ago there were volunteers locally with our hospice then, and they were in the range of 40 or 50. They're still volunteers, and you're saying they're still an important
Yeah, and we do
attribute.
classes twice a year.
Okay, that was one of my
Yeah,
questions.
all
And
spring.
how many are there now? Are there
We
still?
have right about 50, and right now we're looking for expert seamstresses that don't necessarily have to go through the volunteer class, but we have them making quilts for our veterans. And then one thing that we want to get started, and we haven't yet, is having volunteers that are expert sewers. I am not one, that can make, I should have brought one, teddy bears, and we make those out of the person who's died out of an article of clothing that's meaningful. In Colorado, we made them out of wedding dresses, fur coats, old ratty t-shirts and sweatshirts, police uniforms, army uniforms, just whatever the family chose. And we picked teddy bears because everybody loves a teddy bear. And the other beauty of that is when you present the loved one with a bear, they usually hug it, take a big breath and say, oh, it smells like my mom. So that's something that's one of our goals for 2014. So, but our volunteers do so much, and yeah, so if you want to talk to me after, if you want to sign up for a volunteer class, I'll be happy to take your name and number.
Barbara, is there a question? I have a standard answer. I've been around a long time. I'm
It's a
still
great
working.
pumpkin you have.
I work during the summer. And I can't tell you how many people are inquiring about my age. And I tell them I'm 88. And they say, No, 8 and 8 makes 16. It's all how you look at it.
That's right.
Have a sense of humor. Sorry, you do. Love that.
I assume that some people are really in pain, and they could get some medicine and get partial relief, and they could get maybe more intense medicine, and almost be a zombie, almost be out of it. Does the family of the patient have any say in this?
Sure.
Or how much the say is there between the doctor and the family and loved ones, other loved ones?
As Dr. Bartling described, pain is what the patient says it is, but many times it is more than just physical pain. It is a spiritual pain, or it's anxiety, or it's nerves, it's whatever. And so we work really hard. We don't just necessarily prescribe narcotics or opioids or pain medicine, but sometimes we'll say, hey, David, can you kick your visits up to every day or once a week? I mean, we think it's got a spiritual component until we get those symptoms managed. And sometimes the patient will say, no, I'm doing fine, I'm not having any pain. And that's usually a man, sorry to say. And then the little wife will say, you know what, he can hardly walk in the mornings, he's hurting so bad. And, so we do work with the family, and we listen to what they're saying, we listen to what the patient's saying, and then we communicate closely with the physician to do whatever we can. Medicare has tasked us with getting pain managed within 48 hours of admission. And I would say here in Fairbanks, we do a pretty darn good job of getting that handled in 48 hours. But I will say the longer someone's been in pain without it being fully managed, the harder that task is. But yeah, we believe whatever whatever the patient says, and then we try and figure it out.
It's to follow up, if I might. Dr. Bartling hammered, I think, the point how that communication is crucial, and the entire team meets every 2 weeks, and we discuss every single case, every single patient, and so the social worker has her input, what she has seen, and then we create a plan of care for the next 2 weeks for every patient. So we've got not 1 or 2, but 6 or 8 pairs of ears and eyes in the home, listening to both patient and family. And you raise a legitimate concern. I don't want mom to be so dopey she doesn't know who I am. And that is listened to very carefully and communicated among the team.
I've had patients who said to me, I don't want my pain managed. I would rather be alert and have my pain than be a zombie. And those are people, too, that we work with closely and say, well, let's just try a little bit of this or a little bit of that and see if we can get the pain a little better managed so it improves the quality of your life. But yeah, as a nurse for over 30 years, I will say that in hospice, I really feel like we truly listen to what the patient's goals are, and we don't try and fit them into a cookie-cutter regimen. We try and meet their needs and keep them at the center of care.
A question from my memories. What do you do with a patient who has aphasia and can therefore no longer really understand and follow what the suggestions are, who has loved ones, one of whom denies what's happening, the other one understands? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that?
Well, we run into that on a patient, and so hopefully that patient has left their goals of care, so we know what they want, even though they can no longer communicate that with us. So if we have that, then that's to our advantage. If we don't, then we try and glean that information from the people caring for them. And many times it is 2 extreme options, and we try and we'll have what we call a family meeting, and we'll have our chaplain, our social worker, the doctor, the nurse, and everyone present and then ask everyone to speak honestly. What do you see? What do you think?
Yeah.
I have kind of a dramatic example of that. We had, over at the Hospice Center, the nursing home, had a gentleman that had a procedure done down in the lower 48, which resulted in a massive stroke. And advance directives were not discussed before having this procedure. So now Dad can't speak and can't eat. And so a feeding tube was placed. And he was in the nursing home for many years, not communicative. And family was somewhat, didn't know what to do. And so actually the patient ended up being transferred up to Fairbanks, to the Knowledge Center. And so we had the discussion that, so we got family members together and started the discussion about Dad and what his goals were. And it became very clear that Dad would not have ever wanted to be in this situation, but he didn't do his advance directives. Well, one of the things that's important is that when you start something, it's ethically fine to stop something. We have people who get on dialysis and they say enough is enough, we stop. And so we approached the idea that stopping the feeding tube is an option. And so it took over a year of discussion with various family members and visits all the way from the lower 48 to finally come to that conclusion that that's probably what Dad will want to do. And so that was found out. So it's about sitting down, putting the patient in the center, trying to listen as well as one can, and then if that person can't communicate verbally, can they communicate non-verbally? If they can't do that, then loved ones get together and make the best judgment calls possible in the best interest of that patient.
From the experience, and I have various, very good ones and very questionable ones, but I think death often happens in the same way the person in question has lived. So the open-minded person is very ready to let go, whereas the denying person is fighting like crazy and the body goes wrong, etc., etc. But I was wondering, who do you talk to in this case, in the denying case, the person who cannot let go as the younger, my sister in this case, as the younger one, to have issues that have not been resolved during life and can no longer be resolved, but can be faced either. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that? That is so tricky.
I think it's baby steps. You can't force someone to give up their point of view and what they're thinking. All you can do is just kind of present the message gently as you can, and say this is what we're seeing, and sometimes people never come around.
That's right.
We like to think that we're all going to have that perfect death, but it doesn't always happen.
More not.
Yeah.
There is bereavement and grief work that can be done as well with this person. With the ultimate goal of the grief process coming to a place of reconciliation with a new and different reality. That's our goal in grief process. And so this idea of reconciling seems to fit. It's very difficult and a complicated grief process, I sense, but
I will tell you, as a new hospice nurse, I walked in and think I had all the answers. But I also thought all I was going to do was sit there and hold your hand and say, it's okay, Michelle, you can go to the mall. What I've learned in reality is that many times we're doing intensive care nursing in the home without the bells and whistles, and we have to rely on our assessment skills, what the patient's telling us, what the family's telling us, what the rest of the team sees, and then we have to be able to communicate that to the doctor so that a sound decision is made. And it's much more intricate than I ever thought. I really thought it was too bad.
I think it's wonderful that you have a team approach. Where does the patient's primary care doctor fit in?
He is one of the, I don't know if you remember, I talked about the two doctors that have to say a patient's ready for hospice.
Yes, that's
so
what
he's one, and then we communicate with, if that patient's care doctor says, patient primary doctor says, I want to follow that patient, then we communicate with them all along the way, and the patient can continue to see them, can continue to have office visits as long as they're able, and that doctor is very much a part of our team then. If that doctor says, you know what, I'm not comfortable doing this, I would rather defer to Dr. Bartling, then Dr. Bartling takes it. So it's truly up to the patient and the doctor. Dr. Jackie and Andrew Cox are excellent working with our team, and they are part of our team meetings every 2 weeks with their patients. So.
And you addressed this, but I wasn't quite sure. My mom lives in Massachusetts and she's 91, and she hasn't been referred for hospice. She doesn't need that at this point.
Right.
But if she were to die in Massachusetts, can bereavement happen here?
Yes, ma'am.
Free of charge.
And you'd need a referral?
You just call.
Ask for David. And Medicare takes care of that?
It's a community benefit that we provide for each. It's something that we think is important. It's a loss related to a death. And so if you have a loss related to a move or a divorce or any of those other things, we can't really help with that. But any loss related to a death, we're happy to walk that journey with.
Thank you.
Okay, so you have this great palliative care for the patients and the bereavement and stuff with families after death. Is there support for the families of the dying patients while the patients are still alive?
Many times we call that anticipatory grief or support that's needed, and so we'll alert David to that we think somebody's really struggling, a family member, so our social worker and David is our chaplain and or bereavement counselor, whichever hat he needs to wear, will go out and address that.
Do you need a referral for that, or is that something else we can call out?
Well, you have to be our patient to see that. That's part of the hospice.
Is there any support for patients who are not yet in hospice or still within that years of dying from disease?
Well, that's the palliative
Or
care
support
piece.
for the families?
Yeah, and that's part of that palliative care piece that we're working into a more formal program. That's
For the
in
family.
place by December. Yes, of course, the family, we see the patient as part of the family unit, and that's palliative care as well.
As a follow-up to that, is there another group in town that does support groups for caregivers?
There are some, like the Alzheimer's Association does one for people caring for those with dementia or Alzheimer's. We have talked about doing one for caregivers of hospice patients, but that hasn't really taken off yet. So we've offered it a couple times and had nobody show up. So maybe it was our perceived need and maybe not need for the community, but I think it is truly something, as we see in the paper and as we hear, caregiving is a tough role. I think there was a good book written, I think it was called the 48 hour day, yeah. And it's about caring for those with Alzheimer's. I've seen caregivers do amazing things, and many times they'll say, I'm not a nurse, I'm not a doctor, I don't know what I'm doing. And my response is always the same. You're caring for your husband or your wife with love. You're doing a much better job than anybody who doesn't know that. Obviously, your caregiver, for the most part, is part of the family. And so it's someone who's lived with you and been with you in the good times and the bad. So they know your wins and your peculiar function. So we want to honor that as well. We don't want to come in and say, no, you're doing it wrong. We want to just support what's happening. Any other questions?
Well, thank you all.
Oh, you guys are
Thank you. And for those of you who have friends who you know might miss that have wanted to come or couldn't come or for whatever reason, this is been recorded and it'll be up as a YouTube video next week on our website, UAF.edu/summer. And we've also sent a copy to the hospital so that they can distribute it. Okay. We'll find this otherwise we would get releases.
Where do you go?
So the hospital, it says that the hospital, they can make it available to their website. It'll be on our website.
How are you?
How are you? Good. Yes. Thank you for.
Okay, so there you go. I have the whole sheet. So I already have it. I've already lost my
They were.
And I'm about to share it. I knew this all the time. But I didn't have it. But how do I go about this now?
For yourself?
For myself.
It's
terrible.
Yeah, come on outside.
And you just go on the
And I'm probably paying for it today.
Here, every Tuesday. I know. Thank you very much.
You may, in order to sign up for any form of volunteering. Very regular.
I have a card. Yeah, just a minute. Let me grab one.
I'm sorry. Thanks for coming.
See you Friday.
Okay, good. See you.
You know, I tried emailing.
Do you have a pen, David? This is an old phone. Oh, that'll work.
Bye, Miss Kim. I just want to say hi.
When are you coming in?
On Friday, I'm meeting with David at 2 o'clock. I think we're going to do the calls.
Oh, cool. Great.
He's going to show me and then.
Well, we were just recently
Got a phone number on here.
Still on it.
Yeah. So.
I was wondering, I'm not sure when my dad's in the hospital. He's Dr. Bartling.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
not sure if he'll be a hospice. But anyway, my wife and I have been caregiving for him for a couple of years. You know, I was wondering, is there any, like, if you wanted to go away to visit grandkids for a couple of weeks, you know, to find, we've hired some people in that stuff. And I don't have a problem with it. Absolutely. But to find people.
And
We're happy to provide it.
I agree with you wholeheartedly.
But it's Dr. Bowen does refer to the hospice, and as part of that Medicare benefit, you could be in the hospital for 5 days and hospice would
You don't want
that.
to receive tickets and then say, I want
Okay.
And when I think of spirituality and Jesus, living a life that has meaning and purpose, so much to be said for those.
And then, you know, the hard part is finding, you know, someone that would like,
answer death. It is again time for the living. And like you said, you're such a beautiful picture.
Thank you.
So I
unless you need it.
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
Oh, it was strictly by accident. She came up a year ago.
So
Well, I should say, God had a plan for us. It's the same way. I got
really slick. Well
last
done.
not on the radar.
You didn't miss a trick.
And Joe hired me.
Most we have worked, I can't read about 30.
Is that what you got?
Yeah.
It was with Kim. She came up over anniversary a year ago. We were getting ready. Yeah, my son was graduating from college this year. Just to get ready, so it takes some time to set up. But the timing is, you know, we're trying to plan everything. You know how insurance are. Well, so she went and passed her certified hospice nurse accreditation. And she went online and updated her application with the hospital. Because once our son graduated, we saw her home, she had flown up here, and she for part-time work. And it'd be just enough to keep her busy in semi-retirement. So they called her up, they wanted to talk to her. And her upper boss, Carl, he's the assistant administrator. Well, anyway, he was out of town, but one of the
I think so too.
Thank you, well, thank you very, very much, really appreciated it, you know, it's this kind of stuff, it's just so important, and the fact that, you know, everybody was, not everybody, a lot of people had trepidations about the switchover. You know, I mean, that was like, when you were one of the volunteers, you were like, and it's like, what are they gonna do? What are they gonna do? You know, and because it was a very personal, loving, Fairbanks is a golden heart city, this was a people-to-people thing, but it had to go to another level.
There's something else here that you don't know about, or they're not saying right now. Well, almost as quick as she got home, she had a phone call. And within a week is, we want you here 2 weeks. Well, it ain't gonna happen. Because she had to give 3 to 4 weeks in with her administrative position, she was at, which is basically the same position, but she came in and so the same thing. I think up here, it's easier for this, for hospice, for the simple reason. She lived in Canyon City, my hometown, ever since we were young. She worked at the hospital, all phases of the hospital.
Well, they believe that, you know, like I have two relatives who,
grandparents and grandmas.
I've had twin brothers, young,
Passed away.
50.
So it was the circle of life.
And, you know,
a lot of families.
I mean, their dad
And then
was
my
not
niece, there's
doing,
back
you know, the doc that does hospice
and she was active.
gives them a life.
And
Gives them a life.
she's taking care of close people that were close to her. As not only administrator, but as an RN, as a case manager. And she took care of our neighbors, well, actually, her neighbor took care of his wife. Both neighbors.
Which is awesome. You gave her 6 months.
She took care of neighbor's mother. But one of the hardest, and I don't know if I'd say the hardest, but one of the hardest, and maybe because I was family that we talked about, but was a friend of mine, a very close friend, grew up grade school, graduated from high school together. And disconnected through the years. But then when my boys started coming up at the age, especially when I was in grade school, somewhere along the line we got reconnected. And part of this had to do with this. Yeah, but they were way older.
If you do mind.
He started, his family started back in the 80s. For us,
Although I might have.
But anyway, we got reconnected. And we see one another right now.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate the fact that you were also willing to do it. And even though you had 30 people, as I said, they got a lot of it. I got a lot of it. And it will be captured and
He was a big man.
shown
Big in
again.
high school even, but bigger as he got older. But anyway, big man, he was great. He was great with parents. I was just one of those that, and I've seen him do it, sit there.
No, I just think it's really, really important.
He could get vital and then turn around a couple of minutes later.
You need to talk to hospital.
Yeah. Yeah. And he also had the coaches that were just like kids or something, or what the kids didn't do this, or kids didn't do that.
This little girl was
Get right, see, get right.
yeah.
And say,
Did you?
we're wrong. It's our fault. It's your fault. It's my fault. We didn't get kids. We did our job was to get but anyway, so he came down and catch her. and missed my
Rip them up. Get a new one.
Yeah, it's documented in the courthouse.
That's right. That's not
and scary.
But it's nice that she chose.
I find my backstage is short.